Hello and welcome to the two-man power trip of wrestling. I am your host, JP John Paz. With me today, very special guest, former interviewer, backstage announcer, personality for the WWE and Impact Wrestling. She is, of course, McKenzie Mitchell. McKenzie, welcome to two-man power trip. How you doing?
Hi, how are you? I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very good. What's going on in your world? I know you've got new projects lined up left and right. You're very, very busy.
I know. I just landed back in Florida last night around 1 a.m. and then running some errands and doing some things. I'm doing a charity event. I'm doing a signing tomorrow, all in Orlando. Then I head back to rehearsals. I'll meet the crew for the last match that I'm really excited about in Rochester. So we'll start tech rehearsals and then we'll just kind of make the towns. We're going to be doing the tour for the last match musical, which I'm really excited about. I'm playing Scarlet Sublime, and so I'm super excited for the fans to see this aspect of professional wrestling a little bit.
I have the honor from Jeremiah, who obviously one of the producers, and Tommy, one of the producers, got me a few months ago to see the show when they were just kind of trying it
Oh,
out and seeing. Yeah,
nice.
so great show, awesome. The music is great. Like you would actually, if you're like a rock fan or you like good music, the music is great. So how did you kind of get into this role, if you will? Because this is a really cool project.
Thank you. So I actually was connected over from Matt Cardona. He was, I guess it was 2 years ago, whenever the project first kind of got its start. They did like a concept show, about four different shows, and they sold out every time. So Matt is obviously a close friend of mine. His wife, Chelsea Green's one of my best friends. So Matt was like, "Hey, I think you'd be really cool for this role of Scarlet Sublime. It's a play-by-play commentator, something that you could nail and knock out of the park." And then Mickey James is also a friend of mine. And so she mentioned it to me. I knew that Matt had talked to Jeremiah, and then it just kind of happened. It was just coincidental that Matt had mentioned me, Mickey had mentioned me, Jeremiah called me. He's like, "Hey, I think you should play this role because both Mickey and Matt have said that you'd be phenomenal there." And so we lined up a few calls, and then we made it happen. So I've been really lucky to be chosen as Scarlet.
Matt kind of surprised me. He was really good in his role as the heel there. He played a great job. It did good
Well,
work.
yeah, he's a heel. Like he's a
Yeah,
natural
yeah.
heel. What he's been doing on the indies has been phenomenal since he got released from WWE. He's really reinvented himself and became this other human. Really, kind of leaned into Matt Cardona, and I think him playing Alexander Swagger as that like grotesque heel, just like super like in your face, arrogant. I think it was a really perfect fit. The guy that's playing Alexander Swagger for this next tour, Simon Miller, he's also fantastic. If you're able to come and see the show, I think people will really love him. He's such a standout. His personality is so big. But yeah, Matt really found his own in playing Alexander Swagger. And so yeah, it was a perfect fit for him. And then now I'm excited to see what Simon can do.
With you, were you kind of wanting to explore outside of wrestling, even though this is technically wrestling, but it's like a different genre. Is that kind of always what you want to do? Like, did you want to kind of explore outside the realm?
You know what? After I got released in December, I think I was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do and taking opportunities that I truly was interested in. I think a lot of the last match I always say it's 60% theater, it's 40% professional wrestling. And I think they goal obviously for it to be a 50-50. But I think there's so many of the theater aspects that come to life, obviously, with it being a musical. And so this is a different side. When I was younger, I danced, I cheered, I was always on stage. I did some pageantry, I sung, like I was a singer when I was younger. And so this kind of was such a fun and different thing that the professional wrestling world hasn't seen yet, I think. I think it'll be a good experience for fans because they're like, well, we've seen everything under the sun. But a musical kind of blends musical theater and professional wrestling in a very perfect way. And I kind of knew what the concept was from following Matt, and we actually wanted to come and see the show, but we weren't able to come and see it. So I knew what I was getting myself into with that. And I've also just been really leaning into projects I want to take on, just like the last match. Threads with Mackenzie Mitchell, my YouTube show, has been it's been a passion project that I've had for 5 years. I pitched it to WWE. It kind of went nowhere. We filmed a pilot. The concept, the content was there, and then it just sat in the archives. And I knew that there was something there talking about the style and fashion side of professional wrestling. I'm like, I know both of those worlds really well. And I know we're not delivering those stories to fans in the way that we should be. And so taking that and doing that independently has been really cool and really rewarding for me.
When you look at that, right, that show, Threads and, like, Passion, did that bother you at all? Like, they're not interested, but, "Hey, this is great. This is a great idea. This is my passion." Does that bother you? Because you hear that so many times, like, "Oh, they're just weren't interested, but this is such a good idea."
Thank you. Well, I think now getting to do this on my own and do it independently, it's really a blessing in disguise because I don't know if the show would have been done exactly the way that I want it to be done with my vision coming to light. And I actually spoke to Bianca Belair about this the other day, and I'm like, it's just been so rewarding and to see the support from the talent to the fans to everyone going like, this is such a cool idea for someone that is kind of halfway in wrestling, halfway out of wrestling, or that's a female or different communities, different walks of life that may not know what it feels like to get in the ring, but they care about the style and the fashion, what people are wearing to WrestleMania, to Royal Rumble. And so I'm really blessed that it kind of happened this way because now I'm able to take the show and put my exact vision behind it and make it what I want it to be, give the aesthetic, give the feel, give the vibe of what I wanted Threads to be from the beginning. So I think it was a blessing in disguise. And now it's almost gratifying and rewarding to go like, I'm doing this on my own and people are loving it.
The entrance was, like, always a big thing. People want, "Oh, I wanna see the entrance of WrestleMania, WWE," but then so many people get into, "I wanna see the gear. I wanna see what they're
Yeah.
wearing or why they're wearing it." Sometimes there's an Easter egg behind it. Sometimes it's not like a cosplay, but they're honoring somebody or they're putting something there that you don't notice. Could be something with, like, a family member or a friend or
Yeah.
something. So the gear has become very, important for wrestling.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and that's where I was picking up on those things. Having a little bit of perspective from a backstage side of seeing how much time and effort and love and money goes into these outfits, these gears, this attire to create this ultimate persona. That I think fans just really go like, okay, this is what they were wearing and this is how it was made. And now I'm showing the behind the scenes and why those visions came to life. I did an interview with Swerve Strickland. I know he's challenging for the World Heavyweight Championship in AEW. I guess that would be 2 days from now. I don't know when this comes out, but he's so thoughtful in everything he does in his gear, and the processing and what he's wearing and how the fans can connect to the Swerve Strickland character. And so those are the stories that you're like, wow, you're really taking time to create this character in front of our eyes, but then we're just seeing it on television. But when you take 4 steps back and you're reverting back into what he's doing to create the character, it's really beautiful and really cool.
And even if you go, like, back and you're like Ultimate Warrior, but everyone, like, loves, like,
Yeah,
that certain gear, that certain color. Then years later, they'll make the action figure and everybody
that's
wants to,
right.
so there's so much more to the gear than just like, "Oh, it's just what they're wearing that night." It's a marketing thing. It's a something that's important to them, like Swerve, like you said, like, it's something that
Yeah.
could be very important to him. It is one of those things where I don't think it's delved into maybe enough. Like, so it's a great kind of, topic or a great, story to tell as far as gear is concerned.
Thank you. And you know what? There's so many podcasts and there's so many YouTube shows and there's so much coverage for professional wrestling, which is also an amazing thing because I think the world of professional wrestling is booming right now, which is so good for people that are loving the sport and are just wanting to dive into the sport and go like, I need more, I need more. And for me, that was like this conversation is being missed. And that's something that is an idea of talking about the outfits, talking about the gear, talking about those inspirations that I don't think that people were talking about and those stories were there. We're already doing it. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's just let's put eyes on it. Let's talk about it. Let's have those untold stories. And I got the idea from there was a round table that WWE used to do. It was like where they would sit down and talk about moments of like an intercontinental championship or winning some kind of championship. It was Randy Orton, Finn Balor, and AJ Styles. And it was for the Intercontinental Championship. They were sitting down, telling stories about their past reigns, their past title runs. And a story got brought up from Randy, I think, talking to AJ about a set of gear that he wore out to the ring. And then they just riffed for 10 minutes back and forth. And like, you saw them come to life in that moment. And I was like, this is what they care about. Like, they care about the titles, don't get me wrong. But like, those stories humanize the characters, humanize the superstars as people as well. To say, like, oh my gosh, that didn't even get made and you still wore it out to the ring. Like, that helps us connect to these superstars, to these larger than life personas.
It's fun. Like, it's funny. Like, even you're looking at like Macho Man, like everything kind of made a point, but he always dressed differently. It was always very
Yeah.
important. Then you even look at like Shawn Michaels at like Survivor Series 2002. It's like, why was he wearing that? Like, what
Yeah.
is the story behind it? And then they realize, oh,
Right.
his gear didn't make it to the show, so they had to, they had to wear cowboy boots. So there is so much potential, or there's so many stories there. Like with like an inch, you could go a mile with it. You know what I mean? There's
Thank you.
so much there.
Trust me, it's my goal to get Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair on the show. I want to talk about the robes with Ric Flair. I think like we could just talk for hours. I don't know what that cap would be on that YouTube show, particularly on that episode. Maybe we'd have to put it in different parts and air it at different times. But like all the robes that Rick's had throughout the years, and then you look at Charlotte and how she's following in those footsteps, like that would just be such a cool episode. So fingers crossed that I can get them down the road.
Yes. Dress like a champion, look like a champion, be a
That's
champion. Like
right.
that's the Flair way. You look like $1,000,000, you look like you're a star. So there's got to be that story too. It's like, man, you dress like a star. You are a star in perception.
For sure. I totally feel that.
Any other major guests that you'd like love, like dream guests? Obviously Flair is up there, but any other dream guests maybe that we wouldn't think of?
Let me think. I think Becky Lynch would be really phenomenal to get on the guest. Seth Rollins, if we're talking current superstars. I love what they have been doing over the past like what 2, 3 years. They every time that Becky and Seth come out, they truly look like a champion. I even though they're kind of outrageous a lot of the times. Like
Yeah.
some of the stuff that Seth is wearing, even at WrestleMania when he came out with that wig, I'm like, what are you doing? But guess what? It gets people talking, and people are turning their heads and they're going, who is this guy? So I think in the near future of current guests or current superstars, I'd love to get Becky and Seth. And then when we look into like pop culture, I'd love to get Casey Musgraves. I think that she's just an inspiration of mine that I love in the music world. Dua Lipa would also be one down the road. Beyonce, but like we're talking big names. But hey, a girl can dream, right?
Yes, definitely. Dream big. You never know. Yeah, definitely.
That's right.
And even current WWE, there was such an interesting story about Drew McIntyre. His gear didn't make it to the show. Like the story with him would be great, but with the woman who had to make the gear overnight, like, oh my God, like wow, that much effort went into it. Wow.
Absolutely, and that's another side of it too, as well as I've talked to some of the gear makers, um, some that have made Seth and Becky's, and if you watch some of the episodes, everybody mentions Julie. Julie has been with WWE on their like as their seamstress, as their gear maker for years. So that's also something in mind that I want to do is I want to talk to Julie and I want to talk to the team and like, how are you guys putting these looks together? Where's the inspiration coming from? Because a lot of the times the superstars have these ideas, but then they send it over to the team and they say, here's what I want to be, this is what I have a concept for, how do we make it come to life? And I think it goes into details of the fabrics and materials and the sequins and the rhinestones and how it's made and the whole style and fit of everything. So I think that side of it as well would be really interesting for the world to see.
I always am fascinated by like the gear, but the creative arts department, when they give them the idea and they kind of draw it up and then they give it to the seamstress or like the people that are actually creating it, that
Yes,
process is so interesting because it's like your thought in your head to the piece of paper, then actually creating it. What a like crazy how much creative process goes into it.
100%. That's exactly it.
I'm always like fascinated when they show the drawings of like the things that didn't make it. Like, that's terrible. Like the thought process of the negative stuff is funny too because it's like, man, that outfit would have been terrible. Like Undertaker dressed like that. Like, nah, I don't know
Yep.
about that. Or Kane without the mask. Like, very interesting to go back and look at some of the gear that didn't make it too.
Yeah, exactly. I can relate to that a little bit as well. I have my own jewelry business, and so my family's been in fine jewelry for 75 years, and
Wow.
so I always knew I wanted to do something to give back to my family and connect to my family a little bit. I'm living in Florida full time. Well, I say full time. I've been on the road for I don't even know how many weeks, but my home is in Florida, but all of my family is in Missouri. And my family's owned a fine jewelry business there that's been alive since the 1950s. My great grandmother, my great grandfather opened it back in the day. And so now I'm making my own designs. I'm taking some of the pieces that are originals from my family business and kind of making them into their own thing. But then I also, on the other side, I'm creating these pieces from scratch. And so I'm getting to learn about the metals and the rhinestones and all the things. And like, does this work? Are the measurements okay? And trying, how do I process all of that? So it's like, not only behind the business am I kind of the social media manager, the director, like I'm everything behind it. And so for the creative side of it, it's like, what works? What are the measurements? How do we make this come to life in the best way possible?
That's like the hard part, right? Like the end product is great, but getting there is the tough part.
No doubt. Exactly.
Where can everybody find that stuff? Is that headline?
So it's headlined by MM. It's on, if you're following me on social media at McKenzie and Mitchell, you can go and connect to Headline by MM on there as well. But it's headlinebymm.com is where my website is. That's kind of where all my goods, all my creative, my brainchild's all coming to life is all on headlinebymm.com. We're on social media as well, so you can connect right there.
Now, you mentioned before about the WWE release. Did that come as a surprise when you released from WWE and NXT?
Yeah, it did a little bit. I can't say that I expected it, but I think that obviously seeing what I'm doing now and I just hit the ground running. I did give myself a little time. It was around the holidays. So I gave myself time to just spend time with my family and my stepkids and my husband. Um, and then I was like, okay, now the world is my oyster. I can do whatever I want. So I've just really hit the ground running and been at signings, was at WrestleCon, doing the last match, doing my thread show, just whatever, like I said, whatever I want to do now, I'm now kind of taking advantage of that and doing that.
Some people, when they get released, you don't hear from them, or maybe they get depressed, or maybe they go into hiding a little bit, or maybe they're done with the business. You seem to be busier than ever. You seem to have almost taken it like a positive. Some people could take a negative and turn it into positive. You really did that.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw, I've seen, after seeing some people at WrestleMania, they were like, Kins, we see you everywhere. Like, you didn't give it a beat. And I'm like, well, I did. But at the same time, like, we always joke when I was a little girl. My family would joke that my middle name was actually Go, like Go, because I
Yeah.
just have never wanted to stop. And so I'm like, I'm a go-getter and I want to stay busy. If I am not doing something, I'm like, I'm lost. What should I be doing? And so yeah, I just kind of hit the ground running and I just was like, let's explore what this is. I think with WWE, I was there for obviously 4.5 years. And so it was a really different mentality of just like, we're only WWE, we're doing NXT, kind of became a pattern, a routine, if you will. And so now it was like, after I got released, it's like, what do I want to do? And like, how can I explore this? And what avenues can I go down that would be different and allow me to show my personality a little bit differently?
When that release happens, is there like an explanation, or is it just, hey, we're making some cuts and you're gone?
Kind of the second, kind of the latter of just like of budget cuts and it is what it is. And for me, it's of course a roller coaster at first. Like once you first get released, especially knowing that my husband still works in the company. And
Right. Yeah.
so I'm still kind of one foot in, one foot out a little bit of like having him still connected there. Um, so I think it was a roller coaster at first to go like, okay, this sucks. Like, what do we do from here? But then it also it took like I'd say 30 days to just have those emotions and that roller coaster of like having those highs, having those lows, crying if I need to cry, watching the show, but then getting mad and turning it off. Like I think that there's all of that in what happened once the release happened. But then once I like kind of hit I went over that hill, I was like, oh, I'm good. I'm cool. Like there's so much more for me to explore.
Did you ever want to work with Vic Joseph, obviously NXT, the husband, but
Yeah.
the main commentator? Was that a dream? Did you always want to like maybe commentate with him or work with him like as far as on screen role?
It's funny because we've never work together on screen ever. I think that that's really interesting because I don't know how that would come out. I don't know if it would be like really good or we would be like, whoa, this is the chemistry is not there on camera. Obviously, we're married. We've been married for 2 years, but we try to compartmentalize our life a little bit because we don't want it to just be so immersed in professional wrestling. Like as much as we can try to turn off, we try to turn off. Um, so I don't know. I think that would be really interesting to find out and see how that would work. I think now that I'm doing the professional wrestling or the last match, we talked about a little bit. Wouldn't that be hilarious? Like I'm truly learning how to work the commentary table with the last match. Like I'm the play-by-play, I'm the ball and strikes, I'm keeping the train on the tracks. I'm like, can you imagine a 3-man booth? It's Vic in the middle. I'm the ultimate baby face and Booker's on the other side, the ultimate heel. I would think that would be so fun just to try. It may never work. But I'm like, that would be really fun. And I think that there's not a ton of females that do commentary out there. Renee Young she kind of set the bar for everyone. And then Beth Phoenix followed right in her footsteps and did an amazing job in her own right. And so I'm like, who knows? Never say never with that one, right?
Yeah, definitely. When you're working there, right, is WWE the goal, or do you like being in NXT? Because it almost felt like NXT created a life of its own where it could stand on its own. Obviously, they had their own show,
Yeah.
but I mean, and they got their own deal with the CW coming up in the future. But was that a goal to be like a main time, full time WWE, or was NXT good because they were kind of their own standalone?
I always say, and I truly mean this, that NXT was home for me. It really is because I just found my personality and I found my groove at NXT. And I would have people come up to me and be like Andy Hartwell, for example, came up to me one time and she's like, Mackenzie, I think throughout the years, there's never been a more perfect fit for NXT than you. And I know that they loved me at NXT, like the executives and team and all these people really loved me because I found my home in NXT. Um, but I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that I would have loved to go to Raw and SmackDown. I would have loved to have those WrestleMania moments, to have those Royal Rumbles, those big main roster, if you will, moments that I never got to have. And there was a point in June when I kind of thought I was going to SmackDown a little bit. I thought I was working all these dates. I'm doing the live events. I was filling in on SmackDown quite often. I was going and working SmackDown Lowdown, and I thought that was kind of my time to transition a little bit. And then it just didn't work out. It was just not the timing, and that's okay. So yeah, I obviously did have goals to go and do Raw and SmackDown, and like I said, have that WrestleMania moment. But for me, NXT is always my comfort and will always be my comfort. We have a really great relationship with Shawn Michaels, and he's just been so fantastic from the start to the finish. Still today, like he stays in touch and sends his love through Vic. So yeah, NXT is my heart for sure.
And those live events can be pretty fun, like when you're hosting it and stuff. Sometimes they can be better than the actual shows. Sometimes.
It allows you to step out a little bit and have some fun with it. Like there's a reel on my Instagram of Rhea in real time screaming at me to make her announcement again when I was ring announcing. And like those were things that just like you don't know. Sometimes with television, it's like you kind of abide by the book, you abide by the script. But for those live events, like you said, you're getting to have some fun. You're getting to hang out with the fans. You're getting to hang out with each other and just like that's where the team building and the camaraderie comes in because you're on a 3-day loop or you're on a 2-day loop. So you're grabbing food, you're seeing each other at the arena. Okay, pack up, see you tomorrow. Like that was the fun side of it as well. And getting to try my skill a little bit at ring announcing. I never really got that experience when I was at TNA. I maybe ring announced like 1 or 2 matches. It was really my bread and butter was backstage interviewing. And it still was in WWE with backstage interviews. Like I feel like I could do it upside down with my eyes closed. But for ring announcing, it was trying my hand a little bit differently and seeing how to vary my voice and really just pull from a different muscle of my stomach rather than being conversational. It's projecting, it's talking to an audience in a different way. So that was fun for me as well.
Did you want to be the ring announcer after a while, or did you prefer backstage?
Whatever they wanted me to do, I would have done. I prefer backstage interviews, I think, more than anything because it's just so comfortable to me. I feel like I've mastered that skill of a backstage interviewer, of feeling that conversation, creating that camaraderie with whoever my guest is. But it was fun too. Like I was, like I said, I was a singer when I grew up, just like a little girl. Like I didn't do it for long, but I took vocal lessons for years. And I think that there's so much of that. You're seeing like Samantha Irvin
Yeah.
when she's getting to show her skills. She's a natural singer. And I think that that's playing hand in hand with her ring announcements because she's got that vocal range. Um, so yeah, I would have if they would have been like, "Hey, we see you as the Raw ring announcer or the SmackDown or NXT." Like I would have definitely tried my hand at it to see what I could do.
When you look at it too with backstage interviewing, like obviously it's much more of a conversational thing when you're out there in the ring. It is a conversational thing, but it's more for the fans and the people at home.
Yeah.
So it's the same, but it's very different. Obviously, like you said, you got to use your voice more. You got to be a
Yeah.
more like Samantha. Hello, Roman, right? You know, you got to
Yeah,
project more. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I think I love to talk about this because people always were like, in NXT, I didn't hold back in the way that I was doing an interview. Like my expressions were very clear. Like I would play around with the talent, with the superstar. I always wanted the fan to feel like they were connecting with me because I was their representation of like of what you're supposed to feel. I always wanted to make that job easier with the superstar and for the audience so that no one's having to do too much work. Like the audience is understanding, like, oh, I'm supposed to feel this. And the superstar is going, oh, and this is how I want it to feel. I want fans to feel this emotion. So I was kind of that mediator between that in my nonverbal of what I was saying sometimes is, what are your thoughts? Well, how much really can you show personality from what are your thoughts? But I feel like my responses and the way that I was really thinking about those emotions and writing down truly when I would get the script, I would write down what emotion should be felt from that interview so that fans could understand that easily. So it's not a confusing like, wait, are they supposed to be mad? Are they supposed to be happy about this match? Like I wanted that to come across through my persona in a small little way to change the dynamic of that interview.
very good because it's almost like the little psychology of it. And if you're a fan, you're watching and be like, wow, she's disgusted with Gigi Dolan or,
Yeah.
Mandy Rose or whoever. Like, wow, she's disgusted with them. Like, oh, they're the heel, they're the bad guy. Like, oh, that's why they're like, that was a, dastardly thing to say, or that was a very mean spirited reaction. So your reaction psychology wise, that's good. Like even saying to yourself, what's the emotional output that needs to be for this, this 30-second, could be a minute, could be a minute 30, whatever it is for this backstage interview. What's the emotional output? That's great. Good psychology.
And listen, some people will call it overkill, but for me, I'm like, that's my role, and that's how I wanted to do the best at my role. And I learned that probably 2 years into NXT. I'm like, it's another level of thinking. I actually feel like Dana Warrior talked to me about that once of like, what emotion are you once or twice? What emotion are you getting from this interview? And I was like, I love that. And so every time I would do the interview, I would think, what emotion? And I would physically write down sad, anxious, mad, whatever. And then ask where we're going with it. Are we going right into the arena and I'm tossing it back to Vic? Are we going into a match? Is there going to be breaking news? Because that also plays into the feeling and the vibe and the aesthetic of those backstage interviews to make it just not just a piece in the show, but to make it a crucial piece in the show and to stand alone and go like, that was memorable. And I think that I'm still getting comments from fans today that that was some of those best moments of NXT. And so it's really rewarding to see that that really did that extra step of taking those notes and writing down those feelings. It really went a longer way than I thought it would.
Sending the viewer in the right direction too. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
that's what they're supposed to be feeling, like whatever
that's
she was
right.
feeling. Did
Yes,
you ever
totally.
you ever watch older like interviewers like Mean Gene or something? Did you ever like poll and watch some of those guys that were really the best at it?
Some, yes, I would watch some of Mean Gene. Obviously, you see clips that float around on the internet or wherever, and he was so good at listening and responding in real time. And I think that's something that any interviewer and any company can really just grasp onto. Whether you're a correspondent on the sidelines for NFL or you're in a professional wrestling show. I think it's interesting because if you're not listening, your script may be something that's like, you say this, then you say this, then you say this. But if you're not listening, then you're not able to respond in that real time to really to play on that emotion, to play on that verbiage a little bit. Some of the times when I was working with Grayson Waller, a lot of that is ad lib. Like we just kind of riffed on that because it was like, well, we know the premise. Or like Johnny Gargano, some of the stuff with the way, genuinely, when you would see those digital, like they were on like a social media, like YouTube backstage interview or whatever with the way, they didn't give us any script. They would just go like, okay, McKenzie, you asked Johnny about this or whatever, and he's got a boyfriend or whatever it is. And then we just went with it. And that's sometimes the beauty of it, is because I was listening to what they were saying and responding in real time, rather than just, oh, I've got to get to my point and then I've got to close it out and say, see you next week or whatever it is. And so I think that Mean Gene, to wrap all of that up, Mean Gene did obviously a fantastic job at that. And he kind of gave it back. Like he held his own at that, on that set or wherever he was. And Renee Young also does a fantastic job of that. When I was coming into WWE, I really leaned into her style of interviewing, but then twisted it and kind of made it my own as well.
And you mentioned Grace Waller. It's funny, like you would see that you interview him. Obviously, this is years ago or months ago, whatever, when you guys were in NXT. But you'd interview him, but then you see people online like, "Wow, she really doesn't like him." Like, oh my god, it was working. He was being smarmy and heelish.
And that's the realism part of it too, right? In wrestling, if you can make someone believe that the story is real life, whether it's real life or it's not real life, like that's the beauty of it. Because you're like, ooh, where's that line that we toe? Is it real? Is it not real? Like, what are we? You know what I mean? And so that was with Grayson. It was like we kind of had that dynamic. He's an Aussie. He's Australian. And their banter is very much like that. And he always said, like, it's very rare that Americans can understand Australian banter. And he was like, with mine and Grayson's conversation, we could just work off of each other. Cause I wasn't afraid to give it back to him. Like he would say some offhanded comments and I'd be like, dude, what? And then I would respond. And that's what you were seeing on camera, is that ad lib, are those little bits that ended up becoming, became something on television, just not even from a script, just from us knowing each other and getting to learn how we work together.
Now you mentioned singing background a bit, and obviously the last match ties in perfectly. But getting into wrestling, was that a goal to begin with? Like, how did you actually get into the business? Was that something you sought out to do, or no?
I laugh because no, not at all. I went to school for broadcast journalism at the University of Mississippi. I was working as their on-camera host and primary MC for all of the like in-arena sports, even at football games for baseball, basketball, football. I was kind of that jumbotron girl, if you will. That was like, hey, we're in section 4, and if any time during this inning that the Rebels hit a home run, and blah blah blah. Like I was on that kind of doing those scripts, if you will, then throughout college, which gave me really good life experience before I even transitioned and got a job. And right before I was graduating, I talked to my athletic director at Ole Miss, and he was like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to go to, I don't know, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to ESPN, SEC Network? Like what division do you want to kind of go into and lean into? And I'm like, well, I want to move to Nashville and work in sports, entertainment, or music. And he's like, what about professional wrestling? And I went like, are you serious? For real? And he was like, yeah. I'm like, I know nothing about wrestling. He's like, that's okay. Let's just we'll set you up with TNA. At the time, I had interviewed with John Gaborik, Dixie Carter, some of the executives there before I'd even graduated from college. They were like, hey, can you start working next week? I'm like, guys, I have to graduate college in May, and then I will be there. And so that's kind of how I landed that role. Was I had an interview, I did some auditions, if you will. And then I just dove in head first. I knew nothing about the business. I learned from scratch. I was spending my hours at night, Googling Wikipedia, finding Wikipedia pages and being like, okay, Drew Galloway, really tall man. He's Scottish. He hates this person. I was figuring out in my brain. And then I remember one day, probably two years in, it clicked, and I was like, cool, I can do this. I understand the lingo. I understand. I'm starting to see it all together, but it was hard. It was hard work to understand the business and not be directly connected to it. And now I feel like I'm in it. Like I'm in it. It's almost been a decade, and I've been in professional wrestling, and it's so easy to me. And my husband and I talk about that. It's like you had mentioned earlier. Do you want to stay in professional wrestling? The easy answer, like, maybe not, but it's also really easy for me to just like understand the business. And I have so much respect for the business. And I love the superstars and the people that I work with. Like the people are just so amazing. The camaraderie is so amazing. So when those opportunities present themselves, you jump. You obviously jump.
And plus, you met Vic in wrestling. So
I
wrestling obviously
know.
has been good to you. Yeah.
It sure has. Yes, it has. We've been almost 2 years married, which is wild to think about. Like time flies, and so I'm very thankful to wrestling for that. He's truly my soulmate, and is just so supportive in everything that I do.
Would you have ever thought like, okay, I'm in the business. I'm going to find my husband in the business? No, like, right? I mean, crazy the way the world works.
Yeah, I would have never thought that. And I think people have asked me a lot, like, why do you guys all marry each other? Like, so there's so many couples in wrestling: Chelsea Green, Matt Cardona, Maurice and Miz, Brandy Rhodes and Cody Rhodes. Like, I mean, the list obviously goes on. I'm missing so many, but yeah, I think we understand the aspect of the business because it's like a different language that we speak together a little bit. Um, but then like you understand who you're spending time with. Like, hey, I'm going to dinner with so and so. Awesome. Understood. Like there's no insecurity there from the beginning because they really understand the hardship of it, of the travel schedule, of being on live television on a weekly basis, or sometimes twice, three times. Like they get that aspect, which is I think why it works so well. And then obviously if you find that personal connection, like it's a home run.